It had been raining since dusk, the kind of New York rain that blurred everything: headlights, sidewalks, even people's edges. The city moved like a half-forgotten dream behind a curtain of water. Maya James pulled her hood tighter and hurried across 7th Avenue, her white hospital sneakers splashing through puddles the color of asphalt. 12 hours in the emergency ward had left her body heavy, her mind buzzing. She wasn't afraid of exhaustion. She was used to that, but the silence that followed her shifts always felt too large, like a room with no walls. She was halfway across the street when a black Maybach sliced through the downpour. The tires carved a wave that hit her from the knees up. Cold water soaked through her blouse, sticking the fabric to her skin. "Damn it," she whispered, looking down at herself, wet, tired, invisible. The tinted window rolled down with a soft hum. A man sat inside, maybe late 40s. Clean lines in his face, gray eyes sharp enough to cut through the rain. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice deep but distant. "I didn't see the puddle." His tone was polite, but his expression carried that practiced detachment Maya knew too well, the kind rich people used when they spoke to service workers. She forced a small smile. "It's fine. You didn't ruin anything that wasn't already ruined." And she walked on. But before she reached the other side, she heard the car door open. "Wait," he called out. She turned, half expecting a complaint, maybe even a reprimand. Instead, he was standing in the rain, holding an umbrella. A tailored coat darkened by water, hair plastered to his temples. "Please," he said, extending the umbrella toward her. "At least take this." Maya blinked. "You'll get drenched." "I already am." For a moment, their eyes met, the kind of glance that stretches time thin, like glass before it breaks. She hesitated, then took the umbrella. "Thank you." He gave a short nod, but didn't move. The rain softened around them, falling in sheets of silver light under the street lamps. "I've seen you before," he said, almost to himself. Maya frowned. "I doubt that." "The hospital," he continued. "St. Luke's." "Right. You're one of the nurses there." Her grip tightened on the umbrella handle. Yes. You were in the ICU." He finished for her. "My father passed there last year." Recognition flickered. The name came back to her like a half-remembered file. Hawthorne. The Hawthorne who had half the city wired into his software empire. Ethan Hawthorne. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. He nodded, a faint tremor in his jaw. "You took care of him." She didn't remember exactly too many faces, too many nights, but something about his tone made her chest tighten. "That's what we do." He studied her face for a moment, as though trying to find the same kindness that had soothed his father in those final hours. Then, suddenly, a blast of wind caught the umbrella, jerking it from her hands. She gasped, chasing it a few steps before it tumbled into the street, landing in a pool of light. Ethan moved before she could, darting forward and retrieving it. For a man in his late 40s, he moved fast, too fast. "Careful," she warned. He smiled faintly, returning the umbrella to her, drops gliding down his sleeve. "You see, I caused the mess. I should fix it." Something in his self-deprecating tone cracked the distance between them. She found herself smiling Not the polite, work kind of smile, but something real, small, and unexpected. Then maybe next time, she said. You could just avoid puddles altogether. He laughed a low, quiet laugh, almost as though he hadn't done it in a while. I'll make a note. They stood there for another moment, neither moving. Around them, taxis hissed by, horns echoing faintly, but it was as if the city had drawn a soft circle around the two of them, holding them still. Finally, she cleared her throat. I should go. The subway's a few blocks. I can drive you, he said quickly. Her eyes flicked to the Maybach, sleek and impossible. No, thank you. I don't take rides from strangers. I'm not a stranger, he said, then seemed to realize how that sounded, or at least, not entirely. Maya smiled again, this time with something like challenge. Good night, Mr. Hawthorne. He looked startled that she knew his name. Good night, Nurse James. She turned and started walking, umbrella open above her. After a few steps, curiosity tugged at her. She glanced back. He was still standing there, hands in pockets, watching her disappear into the rain. Something about that image stayed with her long after the billionaire in the storm, looking like he didn't know where to go. When Maya reached the subway, the rain had already seeped through her shoes. She sat on the cold bench, heart still beating faster than it should. She tried to shake it off. Men like him belonged to a different universe. Money, silence, control. She had lived her whole life cleaning up after their mistakes, literally and otherwise. Yet his eyes, gray, unguarded for one brief second, had carried a loneliness she recognized. She thought of her apartment, the leaky faucet, the unpaid bill waiting on the counter, the framed photo of her mother on the nightstand. Life had narrowed itself into duty and survival. She told herself she was fine with that. Love was a luxury she had outgrown. Still, something inside her whispered, "You felt something." Across town, Ethan sat in the back of his car, coat still wet. His driver offered a towel, but he waved it off. He couldn't shake the image of the woman on the crosswalk, her eyes sharp yet kind, her voice unafraid. It had been years since anyone spoke to him without calculation or reverence. His world was made of polished meetings and guarded conversations. But she'd looked at him like a person, not a name. He leaned back, watching the raindrops streak down the window. For a moment, he thought of his late father, how the old man had smiled one night in the hospital and said, "Sometimes the only people who still see you as human wear scrubs." The irony was bitter and tender all at once. Home. "Sir?" the driver asked. Ethan hesitated. "No." "Drive past St. Luke's." The driver glanced at him in the mirror, but didn't ask. As the car moved through the rain, Ethan felt something stir, a quiet curiosity, a pull toward a life that wasn't built on profit margins and screens. He told himself it was nothing, just gratitude, just coincidence. But the truth lingered like a heartbeat beneath the noise for the first time in years. He had noticed someone. Maya reached home past midnight. She dropped her wet clothes in the sink, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat by the window. The city lights blurred through the rain like a painting half washed away. Her phone buzzed an automated reminder from the hospital about her next shift. She sighed, typing, confirmed. Then she noticed something on her nightstand, a card she didn't remember leaving there. White, clean, elegant. Probably slipped into her pocket at the hospital earlier that day. She flipped it over. Ethan Hawthorne. Hawthorne Systems. A small note beneath. Handwritten in precise blue ink. Thank you for being kind to my father. E.H. She stared at the handwriting for a long time, her reflection ghosting on the rain-streaked glass. The city outside roared and glittered, but in her chest, something small and warm began to stir something she had buried a long time ago. She placed the card back on the table, turned off the light, and lay down. Sleep came slow, wrapped in the rhythm of the rain. Outside, the storm eased, and somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of a car engine faded into the night. Maya didn't know it yet, but this was not the last time she would see Ethan Hawthorne. The rain had simply chosen the first word of a story neither of them had planned to tell. The morning after the rain, New York woke under a pale gray sky. Maya stood at her kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. The smell of roasted beans rose around her, grounding her in the simple rhythm of morning. She tried to let the warmth erase the image of last night, the man in the storm, the umbrella, the look that had lingered too long. But some things refused to be washed away. She tucked her mother's photograph back into its frame, straightened her name badge, and stepped into the street. The city felt different today, brighter, even under clouds. It annoyed her that she noticed. At Saint Luke's hospital, the fluorescent lights hummed their usual tune of exhaustion. Maya walked the hallway with quiet efficiency, clipboard in hand, her posture a kind of armor. The nurse's station buzzed with chatter, weekend gossip, patient updates, caffeine emergencies. Maya, you got the new VIP case, a younger nurse teased, nudging her elbow. Private suite. Level 12. Guy with more money than God. Maya arched an eyebrow. And you're telling me because you're the only one who doesn't lose her mind around rich people. She sighed. That's because I don't have time to. Still, as she walked toward the elevator, her chest tightened with a strange premonition. When the doors opened on level 12, she instantly felt the difference. The walls here were quieter, the air scented faintly with cedar and disinfectant. She checked the room number 1208. A voice came from inside before she could knock. Come in. She froze. The timbre was unmistakable low, deliberate, the kind of voice that left an aftertaste. For a second, her hand hovered on the handle. Then professionalism took over. She pushed the door open. Ethan Hawthorne sat by the window, one arm hooked to a monitoring line, his other hand resting casually on a book. He looked healthier than most patients, though fatigue shadowed his face. Their eyes met, and the air changed shape. You, he said, a quiet astonishment threading his tone. You're your nurse, she finished, her expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne. Something like amusement flickered across his face. Seems the rain had plans for us. Maya ignored the warmth rising to her cheeks. How are you feeling today? Better than I look, apparently. She glanced at the monitors. You're recovering from a shoulder procedure. Please don't make it worse by moving around too much. Duly noted, he murmured, though his gaze lingered on her. You always talk to your patients like generals in boot camp, only the ones who think they're in charge. He smiled, small, genuine, touché. Over the next few days, Maya saw more of Ethan than she had ever intended. He was unlike any patient she'd cared for, disciplined, sharp, and surprisingly unguarded when he forgot to perform. Between medication rounds and physical therapy, he would ask about her day, her favorite music, her neighborhood. She answered in fragments, just enough to be polite. Still, she caught herself looking forward to his questions. Once, she found him staring out the window at the skyline, his expression unreadable. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Miss what? The world out there?" He smiled without humor. "Sometimes I think it's the other way around. The world misses me only when I stop feeding it." Maya frowned. "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted softly, for a heartbeat. Their silence felt too intimate, too dangerous. She turned back to her chart, but her hands trembled just slightly. Ethan had always measured life by data stock trends, quarterly growth, predictable returns. But in that sterile hospital room, time shifted. Each day she walked in with her quiet strength and tired eyes. Something in him steadied. He noticed the small things, how she hummed under her breath when she changed his IV line, how her hands were gentle but firm, like she'd learned tenderness from surviving pain. He also noticed her ring finger bare. He shouldn't have noticed that. At night, when the hospital fell into its artificial hush, Ethan found himself watching the door, waiting for the next morning. It frightened him how quickly she'd become an anchor in his disordered world. Maya told herself not to think about him outside work, but she did while folding laundry, while standing at the crosswalk, while lying awake at 2 a.m. The thought of him unsettled her in ways she couldn't define. She knew better. Men like Ethan didn't fall in love. They acquired. And yet, there was something different about his quiet. The way it wasn't condescending. He looked at her as though he was trying to understand, not impress. But every time she caught herself softening, she'd remember the headlines she'd glimpsed over the years. Hawthorne Systems acquires 3 startups in a day. Hawthorne donates millions, but lays off hundreds. Power had a price. She had paid it once. In another life, with another man who wore expensive suits and thought love was control. She wasn't stepping into that fire again. 3 weeks later, Ethan's progress astonished his doctors. He moved more easily, smiled more often. But one afternoon, Maya entered his room to find him arguing quietly with his assistant over the phone. "I said no press. Eric, I don't want this story publicized." His tone carried an edge she hadn't heard before, cold, commanding. "If the board wants updates, they can wait until I'm discharged." When he hung up, Maya saw the muscle ticking in his jaw. "Everything okay?" she asked. He exhaled. "The world doesn't stop spinning just because you're broken. Maybe it should," she said. He looked at her, startled by the gentleness in her voice. "You really believe that I believe people deserve to rest?" she replied. "Even those who don't think they do." Something softened in him. "You sound like my father." "Then maybe you should have listened to him." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He didn't seem offended, only quiet. "He used to say the same thing," he murmured. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of rain faint against the window again. Ethan finally said, "Do you ever feel like your life is too small for what's inside you?" Maya hesitated. "Every day." Their eyes met, and neither looked away. That evening, as she prepared to leave, he said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For treating me like a man." not a brand. She almost smiled. Don't get used to it. But as she walked out, she felt his gaze following her, and it wasn't desire she sensed, it was recognition. That night, Maya received a message from the hospital director. Subject: urgent media inquiry. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. Someone had leaked Ethan's hospital admission. Reporters were calling, asking about the mysterious nurse caring for the reclusive tech billionaire. By morning, a photo was circulating online, grainy but unmistakable Maya, pushing Ethan's wheelchair down a hallway. The comments burned. Gold digger. She knows what she's doing. Classic rich man rescuer fantasy. Her phone buzzed nonstop. She turned it off. Heart pounding. By the time she reached the hospital, the gossip had already spread. The younger nurses avoided her eyes. A few smiled too sweetly. Maya kept her head high. She'd survived worse storms. When she entered Ethan's room, he was on the phone, furious. "I'll find out who leaked this," he said. "Don't." She cut in. He turned to her, eyes sharp. "They're dragging your name through mud. You shouldn't have to take that. I can handle it." "That's not the point." "It is the point," she said quietly. "You can fix everything with money, but not this. If you try, you'll make it worse." He froze, the truth of her words hanging heavy between them. For the first time, Maya saw the man behind the empire, someone unaccustomed to powerlessness. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Her voice softened. "So am I." That evening, she was reassigned to another floor for discretion. When she went to tell him, Ethan stood by the window, the city reflected in his eyes. "So this is goodbye," he said. "For now." He hesitated, then reached into the nightstand, pulling out a small card. "If you ever need anything, I won't," she said gently, cutting him off. "But thank you." Their hands brushed as she took the card. The touch was brief, electric, unbearable. Maya turned to leave. "Will I see you again?" he asked, almost under his breath. She didn't look back. "The city's small," she said. "Stranger things have happened." When the door closed behind her, the air in the room shifted emptier, colder. Outside, rain began to fall again, tracing the same rhythm as that first night. And somewhere inside both of them, something quietly refused to let go. Autumn crept into New York without warning. One morning, the air simply changed, as if someone had opened a door to a quieter season. Maya felt it in the wind, in the way the hospital windows fogged earlier, in the weight of her own heart that refused to settle. 3 weeks had passed since she'd last seen Ethan Hawthorne. His name still floated through whispers in the staff lounge, in snippets of conversation on the subway, in the glow of her phone screen when a headline flashed, "Reclusive billionaire recovering after health scare." She scrolled past it every time, but not fast enough. Life had returned to its rhythm: patience, medication charts, the endless hum of machines. Yet everything felt slightly out of tune, as if she were living half a step behind herself. She worked, she smiled, she survived. But every time rain brushed against the windows, her chest tightened. She told herself it was nothing, just habit, just curiosity. But one evening, as she prepared to leave, she found a small envelope slipped under her locker door. No name, just her initials in careful handwriting. M.J. Inside was a single card embossed with the Hawthorne Systems logo and a note. "Thank you for the silence. E." She read it 3 times, then tore it in half. But even as the paper fell, her hands shook. Gratitude and longing, shame and anger all tangled inside her until she couldn't tell them apart. Across the city, Ethan stared at his reflection in the darkened glass of his penthouse. The skyline glittered beneath him, but he barely saw it. The city had lost its pulse since the hospital. He had returned to his empire, to the people who spoke in projections and profit. But every conversation felt like static. He tried to rejoin his old life, the familiar rhythm of control. But something had shifted. Maya's words still haunted him. You can't fix everything with money. He'd built an empire on solving problems. Yet when it came to his own heart, he was helpless. Some nights, he'd find himself driving aimlessly through the rain, past the glowing cross of St. Luke's, wondering if she was still there, if she ever thought of him. But he never stopped, never called. He wasn't sure what he'd say if she answered. Then, one late October afternoon, their paths crossed again by accident, or maybe fate pretending to be coincidence. Maya was leaving the hospital, coat pulled tight against the wind, when a commotion near the ambulance bay caught her attention. A young man had collapsed on the pavement. She rushed forward instinctively, barking orders to the intern behind her. "Get a gurney now." As they lifted the man, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Let me help." She turned, and there he was. Ethan, standing in the rain again. Jacket soaked, eyes steady. For a second, everything inside her froze. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "I was visiting a friend. I saw what happened." "This isn't your place," she said sharply, though her voice trembled. "I know," he said quietly, stepping back. The emergency team swept the patient inside. Maya followed, refusing to look at him again. But when the crisis passed and the hospital settled, she found him waiting near the elevators, hair damp, hands in pockets. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I wanted to make sure he was all right." Her tone softened despite herself. "He will be." They stood in silence, the air between them thick with words unsaid. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You tore up my note." Her breath caught. "You shouldn't have sent it." "Why not?" "Because silence was the only thing keeping us from breaking something neither of us can fix." His jaw tightened. "Maybe some things aren't meant to stay broken." She looked away. "You don't understand." "Then help me," he said, voice low, urgent. "Help me understand." Maya stared at him. This man who had everything yet stood before her like someone searching for home. For a second, her defenses wavered. But then she remembered the last time she'd trusted a man who wanted to understand her, and how easily that understanding had turned to control. "You should go," she whispered, "before you forget who you are." Ethan took a step closer. "Maybe that's exactly what I need." That night, Maya couldn't sleep. His words replayed in her head like the echo of a song she didn't want to remember. "Maybe that's exactly what I need." She sat by her window, watching the city breathe in silver light. The past came back in pieces, her ex-husband's temper, the bruises she hid under long sleeves, the apology flowers that never meant anything. She'd rebuilt her life from that wreckage, brick by fragile brick. She couldn't let it fall apart again. Not for anyone. not even for someone who looked at her like she was the only real thing left in the world. And yet, she could still feel the ghost of his presence, the heat in his eyes, the tremor in his voice. She pressed her palms to her face. "Stop," she whispered to herself. "Stop." But the heart is not a disciplined organ. It remembers what it wants. A week later, Ethan sent another message. Not a letter, not flowers, but a simple envelope with a hospital donation slip. No name, no logo. Just the words, "For the pediatric wing in honor of Nurse Maya James." The director mentioned it casually in a staff meeting, unaware of the storm it would unleash. Maya sat frozen, face composed, heart unraveling. By evening, the rumors were back. He's still chasing her. She's his charity project. Maybe she planned it all along. When she confronted the director, her voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. "You had no right to announce that. It was a generous act." "Maya," the director replied gently, "it could help a lot of children." "It's not about the children," she said, turning away. "It's about what people will say." And they did. By the next morning, her inbox was full of messages, some congratulating her, others laced with poison. She deleted them all. But she couldn't delete the ache. That night, Ethan called for the first time. "Maya," he said, his voice quiet through the receiver. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I only wanted to help." She interrupted. "You think this helps?" I thought. "That's the problem. You think money can clean everything it touches, but some things stay dirty no matter how much you pay." He was silent for a moment. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry." Her throat tightened. "You don't need to be sorry, Ethan. You just need to stay in your world, and I'll stay in mine." Then she hung up. The sound of the disconnect felt like a door slamming inside her chest. Days turned into weeks. Winter came early that year. Maya buried herself in work, volunteering extra shifts, avoiding the spaces where memory might find her. She told herself she had done the right thing, cutting ties before they tangled. Yet sometimes, when she caught her reflection in the elevator glass, she saw the loneliness she'd once glimpsed in his eyes. It unnerved her how similar they looked. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she found an old patient waiting for her outside the hospital, a frail woman named Mrs. Alvarez, whose husband had passed away months ago. Maya had cared for him in his final days. The woman pressed a folded piece of paper into Maya's hand. "He said it was important. Before he died. He told me to give this to the nurse with kind eyes." Maya unfolded it. The handwriting wasn't familiar. It was a simple note. "People heal people, not time." H. She stood there, breath shallow. The initial could have been anyone's. But deep down, she knew it wasn't random. That night, she walked home slowly through the snow. The city was quiet, muffled, as if holding its breath. Inside her apartment, she laid the note on her table, next to the torn pieces of Ethan's first card. She didn't know what the message meant, if it was fate, or coincidence, or simply her own mind, weaving meaning where there was none. But as she turned off the light and looked out at the falling snow, one truth crystallized inside her. She wasn't angry at him. She was angry at herself for feeling seen, for wanting more. Because being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability was a luxury she had sworn she could never afford again. Yet even as she closed her eyes, She saw his face again, rain on his hair, the tremor in his voice, the unguarded look of a man who'd spent too long behind glass. Some wounds don't bleed. They whisper. And sometimes, the only way to heal them is to risk being broken again. Outside, snow fell quietly against the city's heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the skyline, a man looked up from his window at the same falling flakes, wondering if she could still feel the storm they'd once shared. The city had entered that brittle part of winter when even sound seemed to freeze. Steam rose from the grates like ghosts, and the Hudson carried sheets of gray light that never quite became day. Maya walked faster than usual to keep warm, collar pulled up, gloves thin from too many seasons. She hadn't seen Ethan in 2 months, yet his shadow still lived in the corners of her thoughts, uninvited, unshakable. At the hospital, her world narrowed to heart monitors and clipped instructions. She'd grown used to the rhythm again: work hard, stay invisible, avoid anything that could be mistaken for need. But lately, even her colleagues noticed the change. There was a quiet around her that hadn't been there before, the kind that people respect without understanding. That morning, the head nurse handed her a folder. "Community Outreach Project," she said. "You're leading it. City grant. Pediatric health screenings." Maya skimmed the papers, relief flickering through her. New work meant distraction. "When do we start tomorrow?" "At the Hawthorne Foundation Center." The words landed like a held breath released too soon. She looked up sharply. "Whose foundation, you heard me?" the nurse said, unaware of the tremor behind Maya's calm. "Their director requested you personally." Maya forced a smile. "Then I'll be there." Inside, her pulse stumbled. The next day dawned colorless. The foundation's headquarters stood in midtown glass and quiet wealth. Children's drawings framed the lobby walls, bright bursts of crayon against marble. She told herself it was just work, just coincidence. Then the elevator doors opened, and there he was, Ethan Hawthorne. Suit crisp, eyes unreadable. For a heartbeat, the months collapsed between them. "Maya, Mr. Hawthorne." Her tone was professional, distant. "You came." "I was assigned," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "Pure logistics." He nodded slowly, but something vulnerable crossed his face before he hid it. "Then let's get to logistics." The day unfolded in a blur of meetings and checklists. Ethan kept his distance, speaking through staff, his voice precise but flat. Maya matched his composure perfectly, yet beneath the formality, tension pulsed an invisible current neither could suppress. At one point, as they reviewed the facility's new pediatric wing, a little girl wandered up to Maya, clutching a stuffed bear. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. Maya crouched to her level, smiling. "A nurse. I help doctors." "Do you help sad people too?" the child whispered. Maya blinked. "Sometimes." From across the room, Ethan watched, the faintest ache stirring in his chest. He remembered his father's hospital bed, Maya's calm voice steadying the chaos. Watching her now, he realized what had drawn him from the start. It wasn't beauty, though she had that in quiet abundance. It was presence. She carried steadiness the way others carried perfume. When the girl ran back to her parents, Ethan spoke softly. "You're good with them." Maya didn't look at him. "I'm good at my job. I didn't mean it that way." Then how did you mean it? He hesitated. You make people feel safe. She met his gaze, eyes cool but trembling underneath. Safety isn't love. Mr. Hawthorne, it's survival. The words sliced through him with more truth than she knew. That evening, the event drew donors, press, and flashes of cameras. Maya stayed in the background, clipboard in hand. She hated crowds, the noise, the shallow laughter, the way people treated compassion like currency. Ethan gave a brief speech, polished, distant. But when he mentioned the hospital staff who had inspired the program, his voice caught for half a second. Only Maya noticed. Afterward, as the guests thinned, a woman in a crimson dress approached Maya near the refreshments table. You must be the famous nurse, she said, smile too sharp. Ethan speaks highly of you. Maya stiffened. We've worked together professionally. Of course. The woman's gaze flicked over her simple dress, her tired eyes. He has a generous heart. But hearts are unreliable. Don't you think? Before Maya could respond, Ethan appeared. Victoria, he said evenly. You're needed with the press. The woman laughed lightly. Always the rescuer. She left a faint trail of perfume as she walked away. Maya exhaled. Girlfriend investor, he said. Then, after a pause, ex-fiancé. Her brows lifted. I didn't ask for your resume. No, he said quietly. But you always read between the lines. For a moment, neither spoke. Music drifted from the hall, slow and elegant, a string quartet playing something old and fragile. Ethan glanced at her hand resting on the table. Dance with me. She almost laughed. That's not appropriate. Nothing about this is, he said. Just one song. Against her better judgment. She let him lead her onto the empty floor. His hand at her back was steady, the warmth startling. They moved slowly, the rest of the world dissolving into a blur of gold and shadow. For those few minutes, it didn't matter that their lives were built on opposite sides of the city's glass divide. It was just movement, breath, and a memory neither dared to name. When the song ended, Maya stepped away first. Good night, Mr. Hawthorne. But this time, her voice broke on his name. The following morning, headlines bloomed like bruises. Hawthorne reunited with mystery. Nurse at charity gala. From hospital bed to ballroom, a billionaire's redemption romance. Maya read them in stunned silence. The photo showed them mid-dance, her face turned upward, his expression unguarded. Intimate. Too intimate. The comments were crueler this time, sharp with envy and racial venom. She turned off her phone, but the damage was already pulsing through her veins. By the time she reached work, whispers had followed her there. The director called her in, sympathy coding every word. You might consider taking some time off. Maya. Just until the noise dies down. She understood what that meant, until you die down. She left the office without arguing. Outside, the air was knife cold. She walked without direction until she found herself on the same avenue where she'd first met him. Rain turned to snow now. The memory hit like déjà vu his voice. The umbrella. The way everything had begun with an apology. Maybe this was how it would end too. That night, Ethan called again, but this time she answered. Maya, I'm sorry. You always are, she said quietly. I'll issue a statement. Deny everything. Don't. I can't let them do this to you. You can't stop them. Ethan. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Every time you try to save me, you make the cage bigger. He was silent. She could almost hear him breathing, restrained. Why do you keep pushing me away? He asked finally. Because you don't know how to stand still, she whispered. And I can't keep chasing someone who doesn't know where home is. The line went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Home isn't a place, Maya. It's the only person who ever made me feel human. Her throat tightened, then learned to be human without breaking me. And she hung up. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window of his penthouse, city lights swimming in the glass. The world he'd built now felt like scaffolding around an empty space. He thought of her walking alone through the cold, coat too thin, pride thicker than armor. He wanted to call again, to say something that mattered. Instead, he opened his laptop and began drafting a letter, not to her, but to his board. By dawn, it was done, a resignation notice, effective immediately. He didn't know what came next, only that it had to be real. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maya packed her things quietly. She'd requested transfer to the community clinic in Brooklyn, a smaller world, but one where she could breathe again. As she stepped outside, snowflakes drifted through the morning light, soft as confession. For the first time in weeks, she felt something like peace. Not joy, not relief, just the calm that comes after surrender. She didn't know that across the river. Ethan was doing the same thing in a different language, walking away from everything he'd built, finally learning what it meant to lose on purpose. The city kept moving around them, indifferent and infinite. Yet beneath its frozen rhythm ran an undercurrent, quiet, persistent, waiting for spring. The city thawed slowly that spring, like someone waking from a long illness. Street corners filled again with impatient horns and the smell of roasted nuts. Puddles reflected bits of sky that hadn't been blue in months. Maya moved through it as though behind glass. The Brooklyn clinic was smaller than St. Luke's 3 exam rooms, peeling paint, a leaky radiator that hummed all night. She didn't mind. She liked the noise of living things, children coughing, mothers laughing, the world insisting on its own heartbeat. She told herself she'd left the past behind with her old ID badge. But some names live rent-free in the body. Every time she saw a billboard flashing the Hawthorne logo, her pulse betrayed her. Then one morning, the billboards went dark. It started as a rumor: Ethan Hawthorne stepping down, Hawthorne Systems without a leader, a billionaire taking personal leave. The headlines speculated, dissected, invented. Maya ignored them until she couldn't. A patient left a folded newspaper on the waiting bench, and his face stared back at her, tired, thinner, the gray in his hair starker than before. Sources report, Mr. Hawthorne has been hospitalized for a cardiac condition. Representatives declined to comment. The words blurred. She gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. She read the article twice, then shoved it into the trash. But the damage had already settled deep. That night, she sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, the city outside humming with indifferent life. She told herself not to care. He had chosen his world, and she had chosen hers. Still, her mind replayed the last thing he'd said to her. Home isn't a place, it's the only person who made me feel human. She closed her eyes and whispered into the silence. Then why did you leave? No one answered. Across the river, in a private recovery suite at Mount Sinai, Ethan lay awake under the pale rhythm of machines. The surgery had gone well. The doctors said he would live. They didn't say what that living would cost. He had always measured his life in progress bars. But recovery was different. It wasn't linear. It stuttered. Some nights he woke choking on regret, convinced he could still feel the weight of her hand slipping away. When the pain dulled enough for him to write, he reached for the notebook on the bedside table. He began with the date, then crossed it out. He wasn't writing for time anymore. Maya, they tell me I'll recover. I don't know what that means. Sometimes survival feels like the slowest form of dying. You were right. I don't know how to stand still, but these past weeks have forced me to. And in the stillness, I keep seeing your face in the rain. If I ever find the courage to give you this, it will mean I've learned something about being human. He folded the page carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it without sending. The next morning, he asked his assistant to mail a donation to the Brooklyn clinic anonymously. Nothing extravagant, just enough to keep the lights on. He didn't ask for confirmation. Maya noticed the change a week later. New supplies arrived, invoices marked, paid in full. The clinic director shrugged. Some quiet benefactor, he said. Guess angels wear suits now. She wanted to smile. Instead, she felt the faint ache of recognition. She didn't need proof. The gesture carried his signature, the kind that never asked for thanks. That night, she found herself walking longer than usual, tracing the riverfront where the city lights blurred into silver veins. She wondered if he was watching the same water from his window. The thought both comforted and frightened her. She whispered a prayer she hadn't used in years, not for him to come back, but for him to find peace wherever he was. Then, because she was still human, she added softly, and maybe think of me sometimes. Weeks slipped into months. The clinic thrived. The noise of life returned. Yet something in her remained suspended, like a sentence waiting for its final word. One evening, an intern handed her a thick envelope. For you, he said. Came in the morning mail. Her name was written in a hand she didn't recognize. Inside, she found a sealed letter, a formal notice from a law firm, and a smaller envelope marked personal. The notice stated that Ethan Hawthorne had established a new philanthropic trust for healthcare workers. The letter personal carried only 5 words. To the woman who saved me. No signature. But she didn't need one. The room tilted slightly. She sank into the chair, the paper trembling in her hand. Saved was the wrong word. She hadn't saved him. She had simply stood there when he needed someone not to flinch. Yet reading it, she felt something ease inside her, like a wound finally breathing. That night, she wrote back. Not to send, just to speak. Ethan, you once said safety isn't love. Maybe it isn't. But love without safety dies too quickly. I used to think protecting myself was strength. Maybe it was fear. If you ever read this, I hope you know I'm not angry anymore. I just wish we'd met at a time when neither of us was trying so hard to be unbreakable. M. She folded the page and slipped it into her drawer beside the first card he had ever given her, the one she had torn and taped back together. Sometimes, healing looks like that, a scar that holds instead of hides. Summer arrived. The city pulsed again, relentless and bright. Maya's days filled with laughter, exhaustion, small victories. She told herself she was fine. And for the most part, she was. Then one humid evening, as she locked the clinic door, a man approached, mid-30s, wearing the expression of someone who carried news. Ms. James, yes. I work with Mr. Hawthorne's foundation. He hesitated. He asked me to deliver this. She froze. Is he? He's recovering, the man said quickly, out of the country for treatment. He wanted to send his thanks in person, but travel isn't possible right now. He handed her a small package, nodded, and left before she could ask more. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, unmarked except for one line on the first page, for the stories we never got to tell. No signature. Again. But his handwriting curved softly across the paper, deliberate and alive. She traced the words with her fingertip, then closed the book. The air smelled faintly of rain, somewhere far away. He was still writing, across the Atlantic, in a quiet villa overlooking the sea. Ethan walked slowly along the terrace, recovering strength in measured steps. The doctors said his heart was healing, but he knew better. Some parts of it would never mend the same way. He wrote every morning now, letters he never sent. To his father, to his younger self, to Maya. He told her about the ocean, the color of it at dawn, the way salt burned his lungs clean. He didn't ask forgiveness. He only hoped that, in some parallel version of time, she had found peace too. On the desk beside him lay her photo, clipped from a newspaper article about the clinic's new outreach program. She was laughing in the picture, head tilted back, eyes half closed, unguarded. He smiled faintly. That was enough. In Brooklyn, Maya opened the clinic early one morning to find the first light spilling across the waiting room. She hadn't heard from him again, but she didn't expect to. Some connections survive only in the silence that follows them. She turned the sign to open, breathed in the smell of disinfectant and coffee, and whispered to the empty room, "Good morning, Ethan." No answer came, only the low hum of the city waking. But the ache in her chest no longer felt like loss. It felt like memory doing its job. And memory, she realized, was a form of love that required no return address. Outside, the sun rose over the skyline, painting the river in shades of gold. Somewhere far away, a man paused his pen mid-sentence and looked toward the same horizon, as though he could feel the echo of her heartbeat in the light. Between them stretched oceans, years, and silence, but also the invisible thread of something still unfinished. The letter he'd written months ago remained on his desk, sealed and unsent. He kept it that way, not out of fear, but reverence. Some words, he had learned, are meant to live in the space between people, not in the mailbox. And in that space, love breathed quietly alive, waiting, patient. A full year had passed since Maya last heard his name spoken aloud. Time had reshaped her life quietly. The clinic had grown 2 more doctors. A small waiting room painted sunflower yellow. Children ran through the hallways now, their laughter bright enough to drown out everything else. Maya worked longer hours, but felt lighter somehow, as if the noise of the world no longer reached the core of her. The ache had become part of her rhythm, no longer sharp, just a low note that hummed beneath the days. Then, one morning in early spring, a letter arrived stamped Hawthorne Foundation. Her hands stilled. She unfolded it slowly. The foundation is hosting its annual gala to fund community health programs. Your clinic has been nominated for a humanitarian grant. Attendance is requested. There was no signature, only the foundation seal in gold. But beneath it, a faint handwritten postscript, "I hope you'll come." For a long moment, she simply stared at the words, unsure if she was angry, grateful, or both. Then she folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum, marble floors, gleaming, chandeliers burning like constellations. Maya arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress that brushed her knees. She felt out of place amid diamonds and champagne, but she carried herself with quiet grace, the kind born of years surviving harder rooms. A hostess led her through the crowd. Music floated through the air, soft strings and polite laughter. She scanned the hall automatically and then stopped. He was there. Ethan stood near the grand staircase, thinner but stronger, a man rebuilt. His hair had silvered at the temples, and he moved with deliberate calm, as if he'd learned to measure every breath. When he turned, his eyes found her instantly, like he'd been waiting for that single moment all evening. For a second, neither moved. The noise of the crowd faded until there was only the hum between them, the memory of everything said and unsaid. Then he walked toward her. Maya, just her name, quiet, careful. Ethan. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. "You came," he said. "You asked." She answered. A small smile touched his lips, the kind that belonged to someone who knew how easily smiles could break. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." They stepped aside, away from the crowd, into the corridor lined with ancient sculptures. The silence there was softer, almost sacred. "You look well," she said finally. "I am," he replied. "Better than I deserve." Maya tilted her head. "You're still dramatic." He laughed quietly. Old habits die slowly. They stood by a marble column, the city glittering beyond the glass. He gestured toward the hall. "The grant we wanted to honor the clinic's work. It wasn't my idea alone." "I know," she said, though part of her wondered if it was a lie. "Thank you. It's the least I could do." "For what?" "For everything I broke. Even the things I didn't mean to." Her gaze softened. "Ethan, you didn't break me. You just reminded me I could still feel." That silenced him. His throat worked as if words were trying to climb out, but couldn't. Finally, he said, "I wrote you once. A letter I never sent." "I know," she whispered. "And I wrote one too." Something like relief flickered across his face. "Then maybe we've been speaking to each other all along." A waiter passed. She took a glass of water. He a glass of wine. The conversation turned lighter updates about the foundation, the clinic, the small details that fill the distance between years. But beneath it, something unspoken kept moving, like a tide beneath calm water. When the speeches began inside, Ethan leaned closer. "Can we get some air outside?" The museum steps glowed under streetlights. The city moved below them, taxis flashing, laughter spilling from sidewalks. They stood side by side, two silhouettes against the hum of New York. "Do you ever think about the rain?" he asked. "Sometimes. I still have the umbrella." She smiled faintly. "You keep odd souvenirs." "It's the only thing I didn't buy." The words hung between them, tender and raw. He turned to face her fully. "I spent years trying to build things so big I'd never feel small again. But when I lost all of it, the only thing I wanted was to be back in that rain with you." "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head gently. "I don't mean it as a plea. Just truth." His eyes met hers, steady. "I had to break to learn how to stop breaking everything I touched." Maya looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once steadied his heartbeat. "You think pain makes us better? I think it makes us honest." She nodded slowly. "Maybe honesty's the closest we get to redemption." They walked through Central Park after the event. Quiet, except for the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and spring. Ethan broke the silence. "The doctors say I should slow down. I'm trying. Bought a house upstate." "That doesn't sound like you." "It doesn't feel like me either," he admitted. "But I'm learning." He hesitated, then added, "There's a guest cottage. The clinic could use weekend retreats, training programs, if you ever needed space." She smiled gently. "You're still trying to give." "It's all I know." "Then learn something new." He laughed under his breath. "You'd be a tough teacher." "I already was," she said, smiling faintly. They reached the bridge over the lake. The city lights shimmered on the water, fractured and whole all at once. He said, almost to himself, "Do you ever think we could start over?" Maya took a long time to answer. Starting over isn't real, but continuing, that's different. He turned toward her. "Then let's continue." Her breath caught, the simplest of offers carrying the weight of everything they'd lost. They sat on a bench overlooking the dark water. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. "Finally," she said, "when I left the hospital, I thought silence was safety. But it's strange. Now I miss the sound of your voice in the noise." He smiled softly. "I used to think silence meant control. Now I think it's just fear with manners." She laughed, really laughed, and the sound startled both of them. It was light, unguarded, the first laugh they'd shared since the night of the storm. He watched her, and something inside him finally settled. "You look like yourself again," he said. "I am myself again," she replied. "That's what healing does. It gives you back what you thought was gone." They walked back toward the museum, where the last guests were leaving. At the bottom of the steps, Ethan stopped. "Maya, can I ask you something, son? If I were just a man, no name, no company, no noise, would you have let me love you?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "If you were just a man, you wouldn't have found me. And if I hadn't met the man you were, I wouldn't believe the one you've become." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Then maybe that's enough." "It is," she said softly. He offered his hand. "Can I walk you home?" She hesitated only a second before slipping her fingers into his. The touch was simple, human, true. As they crossed the street, the first drops of rain began to fall soft, almost shy. Maya tilted her face upward and laughed again. You and the weather have terrible timing. Maybe it's trying to give us a rewrite, he said, or a reminder. Of what? That some storms are worth walking through twice. They reached the corner where they'd first met years ago. The streetlight flickered above them, rain glinting in the beam. Ethan took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. You'll get wet, she protested. He smiled. I've survived worse. For a moment they simply stood there, two people who had learned that love wasn't a grand rescue, but a slow returning. She looked at him, rain tracing her face like memory. You know, I never really hated you. I never stopped missing you. Their hands tightened, rain drumming between them like applause. When they finally parted, it wasn't with promises, but with something quieter, truer, a shared knowing that the past no longer defined them. As she walked away, Maya felt light enough to breathe again. Behind her, Ethan watched until she disappeared around the corner, then whispered into the rain, "Thank you for coming back." Neither of them knew what would come next, only that this time, it would begin without fear. And for the first time in years, the city's endless noise sounded almost like peace. For a few months, peace felt almost believable. Maya and Ethan learned the fragile art of being ordinary coffee instead of champagne. Late-night phone calls that ended in comfortable silence. They never called it love again. The word felt too loud for something that finally fit in quiet spaces. But peace, like weather, never stayed. It began with a photograph. Someone had captured them, walking through the Sunday market in Brooklyn, her hand on his sleeve. His head tilted toward her, as if the whole street had disappeared. The image landed online before noon. By evening, it had been shared across tabloids, under captions that bled equal parts curiosity and contempt. Billionaire Hawthorne's new muse. Power, privilege, and the woman who tamed him. Maya saw it while refilling supplies at the clinic. Her stomach clenched, not from surprise, but exhaustion. She'd spent years stitching dignity back into her skin. Now strangers were tearing at it with words they'd never have the courage to say aloud. When she called Ethan, he already knew. "I'll handle it," he said. His voice was steady, but she heard the old impulse rising: control, defense, the instinct to fix. "No," she said quietly. "You'll make it worse. They're attacking you. Maya, they're attacking an idea of me. You can't defend that." Silence stretched. Then he exhaled. Slow. "I don't know how to do nothing." "Then learn," she whispered, and hung up before her voice could break. Within days, her inbox flooded reporters, donors, old colleagues suddenly concerned. A board member suggested she step aside temporarily for the good of the clinic. The words stung less for what they meant than for what they implied: that her worth was conditional, that her presence endangered what she'd built. That night, she locked herself in the supply room and cried quietly into her sleeve. The tears weren't for the rumors, but for the fatigue of always having to prove she'd earned her place. Outside, thunder rolled. The first storm of summer was gathering. Ethan refused to hide. He called a press conference without telling her a decision born of desperation more than pride. When Maya saw the live feed flashing across her phone, her heart sank. He stood before the microphones, composed yet trembling beneath it. "I owe the public no explanation," he began, "but I owe honesty to the woman who taught me what integrity means." Maya closed her eyes. "She's not my charity," he continued. She's not my project. She's the reason I stopped believing money could substitute for courage. And if you can't understand that, maybe you've forgotten what love looks like when it isn't for sale. The room erupted questions, flashes, chaos. Maya turned the phone face down, hands shaking. The confession wasn't romantic. It was reckless. But buried in it was a truth she'd both feared and longed to hear. The next morning, protesters gathered outside the clinic, some supportive, others venomous. The board suspended her pending review. When Ethan arrived, security refused to let him in. He waited across the street until she appeared, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "This isn't helping," she said. "I thought telling the truth would free us. Freedom doesn't come from microphones." He swallowed hard. "Then what does it come from? Silence, consistency, time." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed firm. "I can't lose what we're building here. Ethan, I can't lose myself again." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll disappear if that's what it takes." "Don't make promises in the middle of storms," she said. "They sound like thunder, loud and gone too soon." Weeks passed. Headlines faded. Attention drifted elsewhere. Ethan withdrew from public life. True to his word, he sold more shares, donated anonymously, retreated to his house upstate. Maya stayed in Brooklyn, volunteering while the board reviewed her position. Every few days, he sent brief texts, still breathing. "How are the kids at the clinic?" "Miss the noise." She replied rarely, but never deleted them. Sometimes at night, she would step onto the roof of her building and look toward the dark stretch of Hudson that separated them, thinking how distance could feel both punishment and mercy. Then came the hurricane. It swept up the coast without warning, flooding the lower boroughs. The clinic became an emergency shelter overnight. Maya worked 36 hours straight, bandaging, comforting, coordinating with rescue teams. Power flickered, supplies dwindled. At dawn, exhausted and soaked to the bone, she stepped outside for air and froze. Ethan was there, boots muddy, coat drenched, carrying a crate of medical supplies. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shouted over the wind, delivering what the trucks couldn't. He said simply, "You shouldn't be here. You just recovered. I'm fine." But he wasn't. His hands trembled, face pale. She grabbed his wrist. "You'll collapse." He smiled faintly. "Then at least I'll do it somewhere that matters." The storm howled around them, relentless. In that chaos, something inside her gave way, not to fear, but to understanding. He wasn't trying to save her this time. He was showing up, quietly, painfully human. By morning, the worst had passed. The streets shimmered with water, debris floating like forgotten prayers. They sat on the clinic steps, wrapped in blankets, steam rising from cups of instant coffee. Maya looked at him, at the mud on his shoes, the exhaustion carved into his face. "You could have died. Then it would have been doing something honest," he said softly. She shook her head. "Honesty isn't worth dying for." "No," he murmured. "But sometimes it's worth living differently for." The words settled between them like a fragile peace. She reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead. "You really don't know how to quit, do you? Odd on you," he said. When the flood receded, news crews returned, this time to praise the clinic's efforts. Pictures of Maya leading the rescue teams went viral. The board reinstated her, publicly lauding her dedication. No one mentioned the scandal. The narrative had changed. Heroism sells better than controversy. Ethan declined every interview. He stayed quietly at her side, helping rebuild the damaged wards. Sometimes they worked without speaking, their silence saying everything it needed to. One evening, as they repainted the children's wing, she said without looking up, "You know they'll talk again. Let them," he replied. "We can't keep living like apologies." She smiled faintly. "I'm tired of apologizing." "Then stop." He dipped the roller into white paint, tracing long, clean strokes across the wall. "For years I built towers to be seen," he said. "Now I just want to build something that lasts." She turned to him, paint flecking her cheek. "You already are." That night, thunder rolled far in the distance, soft, almost affectionate. They stood by the window, watching the sky bruise itself purple. Maya whispered, "I used to think storms were punishment. And now I think they're just the world reminding us it's alive." He slipped his hand into hers. "Then maybe we are too." For a while they said nothing more. Outside, the city glittered wet and new. The storm passed without fury this time, just rain, gentle, cleansing, steady. Months later, a journalist asked Ethan why he no longer appeared in the business pages. He smiled and said, "Because the only headlines worth chasing are the quiet ones, the lives healed, the people forgiven." Maya read the interview in her office, sunlight pooling on her desk. She closed the magazine and looked out the window at the line of patients waiting with calm patience. Life had found its rhythm again, imperfect, unglamorous, real. She picked up her phone and sent a single message. "Lunch break at noon. Bring that awful coffee you like. Across the river." His reply came instantly, already brewing. And outside, rain began to fall soft, familiar, like a memory choosing to stay. The first light of morning crept over the city like forgiveness. It brushed against the rooftops, spilled down the glass of high-rises, and found its way into the narrow streets of Brooklyn, where the clinic stood rebuilt, repainted, alive again. Inside, Maya watched the sunlight crawl across the floor tiles. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing. The hum of life around her felt softer, less like a demand, more like a heartbeat she'd finally learned to trust. She poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them to the small office at the back. Ethan sat by the window, sleeves rolled up, reading through paperwork with a focus that made her smile. The morning light caught the silver in his hair. He looked older now, but also freer, like a man who'd stopped running from his own reflection. "Here," she said, setting his cup down. "Your terrible blend." He looked up, eyes warm. "You say that every day, yet you still make it." "Habit," she teased. "Affection," he corrected. Their smiles lingered a moment longer than usual before fading into the easy silence that had come to define them. Months had passed since the flood, since the chaos and noise. Public attention had moved on, but what remained was better: a steady stream of volunteers, new partnerships, and a quiet rhythm between 2 people who had survived themselves. The clinic's nameplate gleamed on the front door now. The Haven, founded by Maya James and Ethan Hawthorne. When the press first asked why they hadn't married, Maya simply said, "Because love doesn't need paperwork to build something that matters." The quote spread online, stitched onto digital postcards and self-help blogs. She ignored all of it. Words were easy. Living them, that was the work. Every morning, Ethan arrived early to fix whatever the building had decided to break that week: a flickering light, a loose handle, a door that wouldn't close right. Maya used to protest, but she'd stopped. Watching him fumble with tools, cursing softly under his breath, had become part of her peace. Sometimes love was just that, someone fixing small things so you could keep holding the big ones. One afternoon, while organizing files, Maya found a sealed envelope buried in an old drawer. Her name was written on it in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. She looked up. He was across the hall, helping a child draw on the waiting room wall the clinic's new mural of wishes. His laughter filled the space, quiet and full. She hesitated, then slipped the envelope into her pocket. Later that night, when the city had gone still, she opened it. Maya, I wrote this the week before the surgery, when I wasn't sure if I'd wake up. I never sent it, because it wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning I didn't know how to ask for. If you're reading this, it means we've both learned how to stay. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Tears came without warning, not from sadness, but from the simple grace of survival. She folded the letter gently and placed it beside the torn, mended card she had once taped back together years ago. Her past and present lay side by side, proof that broken things could hold more meaning when repaired. Later that month, the mayor's office invited Maya and Ethan to speak at a city conference on community rebuilding. Maya refused at first. "I'm not a speaker," she said. "I'm a nurse." "You're a leader," Ethan countered. "And people listen when truth doesn't sound rehearsed." She rolled her eyes. "So you'll do the talking." He shook his head. "This time, I'll listen." When the day came, she stood before a crowd of professionals and journalists, palms sweating. But when she saw Ethan in the front row steady, proud, her voice found its rhythm. "I used to believe healing was something you gave to others," she said. "Now I know it's something you build together, one scar at a time." The applause was quiet at first, then rose like a tide. Ethan didn't clap, he just smiled. The kind of smile that said, "This is what we were meant to become." Peace never lasts untested. One evening, Ethan collapsed mid-conversation, the coffee cup slipping from his hand. Panic surged through Maya like lightning. She caught him before he hit the floor, her training taking over even as her heart fractured. At the hospital, machines hummed around him again, the same sterile chorus that had first bound their lives together. The doctor emerged an hour later. "It's not serious," he assured. "A strain. Exhaustion. He needs rest." Maya nodded, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. When she was finally allowed inside, Ethan was awake, eyes half open. "Guess I overdid it," he murmured. "You scared me," she said softly. He reached for her hand, weak but warm. "I promised you I wouldn't die for honesty. I plan to keep that." She laughed through tears. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected. During his recovery, they spent long afternoons by the window of his hospital room, watching the city move below like a living pulse. One day, Ethan turned to her and said, "You know what I regret?" Maya smiled faintly. "This again," he said. I regret that I didn't find you sooner. Not because I wanted more time, but because I wasted so much pretending I didn't need what you give so easily. And what's that, Grace? He said simply. She looked away, fighting the warmth rising in her chest. You make me sound like a saint. No, he said. You make me sound forgiven. When Ethan finally came home, they retreated to his house upstate for a few weeks, a quiet refuge, surrounded by pine trees and sky. The air smelled of earth and rain. Maya spent mornings reading on the porch. Ethan cooked badly but enthusiastically, insisting on burnt pancakes that made her laugh until she cried. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she said, "We could turn this place into a retreat for nurses, somewhere they can rest." He smiled. "Then it's yours, Ethan." "No," he interrupted gently. "It's ours. Everything worth keeping is. And for once." She didn't argue. Weeks later, Maya began a tradition. Every month, she wrote a letter to herself, to the woman who once thought love was dangerous, to remind her how wrong she'd been. You are allowed to be happy without waiting for permission. You are allowed to stay. You are allowed to love again. She kept the letters in a wooden box under their bed. Ethan never asked to read them, but she caught him glancing at the box sometimes, smiling like a man grateful to live inside someone's healing. Years later, long after headlines had forgotten their names, Maya woke before sunrise. The house was quiet except for the faint rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside her. She lay still for a moment, listening to it steady, certain, alive. Outside, dawn was breaking. The sky glowed soft gold, the same color as forgiveness. She slipped out of bed, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch. The world smelled new, dew rising from the grass like prayer. Moments later, Ethan joined her, blanket over his shoulders, hair tousled. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't want to," she said, handing him a cup. They stood together, watching the light spill over the trees. "After a while," he said, "do you ever think about how far we've come?" She smiled. "Every morning." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then maybe this is what forever looks like." Maya turned to him, eyes soft. "No," she said gently. "This is what peace looks like. Forever is just what we build around it." He nodded, pulling her closer as the first rays of sunlight touched their faces. And for a moment, everything felt complete, not perfect, not dramatic, but deeply, quietly, right. When they went back inside, a small framed photo sat by the doorway, 2 umbrellas, side by side, hanging from a rainy street years ago. Under it, in Maya's handwriting, were 4 words that told the whole story. We stayed through rain. The city would wake soon. Life would call again, patience, calls, plans, noise. But for now, they stood together at the edge of morning, drinking coffee, saying nothing, their hearts steady in the soft rhythm of a day that had just begun. And as the sun lifted higher, spilling gold through the windows of their shared life, Maya whispered the only prayer she still believed in. Let it always be this simple.